Hello, and welcome to our final case study. In this case study, we'll be looking at Tulasi Srinivas's book, The Cow in the Elevator, one particular chapter in this. Now, I've entitled this chapter Darshan and Wonder, because these are the two main ideas we're going to be looking at today. Darshan is the moment in Hinduism when one looks at God and God looks at them, and they share a moment. That's darshan. You have that when you go to a temple and look at the body of God or an image of God called a murti. And by wonder, I mean that sense of amazement that one gets when they see a religious image or they see any image that really brings them to a state of being taken outside yourself, where you are overwhelmed by the experience or the glory of something. So when Tulasi Srinivas takes an entire book and organizes it around the anthropology of wonder, she's in fact, instead of looking at religion and violence or religion and conflict or religion and difference, she's looking at how Hindus experience wonder and experience joy in their religion, which I find to be a very compelling move. Now, to think about darshan, we have to understand that the majority of interactions that Hindus have with gods or experiences that they have in Hinduism is mediated by the visual sense. The interactions and transactions with God are through the eyes. So here let's talk about murtis for a second. The word murti is often translated into English as idol, which isn't a very good translation because murti means sort of like the body. It means a body or an image, specifically an image of God. If you have someone who is called a Veda Murti, that is someone who has learned the Vedic scriptures so completely that their very body contains the Vedas. So Hindus may see an image of God, but they also read images of God. And I'll explain this in just a second. So Hindu images, like I said, are murtis. So I want you to stick that in your head, which means body, manifestation, or a solid form. But what do I mean by reading an image? So here's Ganesh, the elephant-headed god, whom we'll be looking at mostly today because Tulasi Srinivas is writing about a Ganesh temple. So I look at Ganesh first here. The first thing I see is his big belly. Well, I know his big belly means that he's absolutely filled with joy and goodness and generosity. Then I look at his right hand, and he's holding his hand up. So that's the Abhaya Mudra. That means have no fear. You'll see a swastika there, which means infinity and auspiciousness. And it was used long before the Nazis picked it up in India. And you see in his other hand, in his giving hand, you see he's giving you ladus. These are sweet balls of, what is the ingredient? I don't know. They're delicious. So he's giving you a bowl of sweets. You look at Ganesha closer, and you see that in his left hand, our right, he's holding a noose. Trust me, that's a noose. And then on the other hand, you see that he's holding an axe. Trust me, that's an axe. So here's the thing with Ganesha. He's the Lord of beginnings and endings. He's worshipped at the beginning of every ritual because he's the Lord of beginnings. You'll see him often in temples at the threshold because he's the god of doorways. He's the god that closes doors and opens them up. One friend of mine used to always say to go to Ganesh means you knock on a door and he says, no. And then you knock again and he says, all right, come on in. Well, to take this further, he holds a noose in one hand. And the idea is he takes that noose and lightly puts it by your neck and guides you in the right direction. In his other hand, he has an axe or a goad, which is a long sort of metal spike that one uses to sort of guide an elephant when you're driving it in any direction. So the idea is he'll lightly guide you where you need to go. And if you go that way, that's good. If you don't go that way, he'll poke you. He'll poke you and make you go the way you need to go. Then below him, you see a mouse. This delightful elephant-headed god with a big belly rides around on a comical little mouse by the name Mushika, which is just wonderful. So as I went through that, I wasn't just explaining to you the iconography, and I could go on actually for hours talking about this icon, but I'm reading the god. And if I'm in a temple, I would be reading all the other gods around that would tell me about how the deities interact, which deity is most important, and the relationships between the deities based on how they are depicted. All of these telling you about the deities, telling you about cosmic truths, telling you about practical truths. So when Diana Ack, who wrote the famous book about Darshan that you read a few pages of today, writes about reading an image, this is what she's getting at. And art historians do this quite a bit. You read an image, you don't just look at an image. So When we transact with deities, and remember that I argue in religion, and I would argue, well, in Hinduism, but I would argue in religion in general, the big thing is transacting with with deities who are often invisible. Well, in Hinduism, you don't deal with invisible deities. God has a form. God is in an image. You can envision God. You know exactly what God looks like. So deities are present in the images. It's thought that the images are embodied versions of the deity. The deity, when you're looking at the image, especially in a temple, and like on the right, in this big temple deity, that God is thought to be alive and actively present. Now, you can find murtis in large temples, such as the one on the left, but you can also see them in architectural adornments. You can see them on buildings and whatnot, often by doorways when you're talking about Ganesh. Then here you look in the center and you see just a famous painting of Ganesh. A lot of people will put up posters of gods in their homes. Furthermore, they will even have tiny little murtis that are statues in their homes, like this little guy over here, this Ganesha. So this is to say that you can find them in large temples, you can find them in tiny little temples, you can find them in architectural adornments, and posters and paintings, and also photographs. A lot of people will get photographs of famous murtis of gods, and then they'll display them in their homes. Hindus will display these murtis in pictures or in small statues, not only in their homes and in temples, but they'll even put little versions of them in their car. So, you know, Jesus is my co-pilot, Ganesha is on the dashboard. Now, all these murtis are considered to be sort of worthy of devotion and to be sites of transaction and worthy of transaction. So you can make offerings to the poster, you can make offerings to the little Ganesh in your house. And all of those things will help you build a connection with him. It's not a quid pro quo. It's not that, you know, he sort of gives you something or you give him something and he gives you something in return. But the idea is that you have a relationship with that deity and you want to give them gifts and they want to give you grace. And the gifts help you focus your transactions. Now, these small images that you would find in a home can be actually quite intimate. I mean, they're not exactly treated as members of the family, but you have a personal connection. So when an image, and you look at this, this is the image here is a little nutty because it's an image of someone who was once alive. And sometimes they'll make an image of a dead person into a murti. Lots of things happen. It's India. Anyway, so when a temple image is made, it's made by artists outside of the temple. It's carved out of whatever material or made out of bronze, but it's not considered alive until it's placed in the temple space in its proper location. It's consecrated, and a priest comes by and paints the final strokes of the eye. They paint the pupils and the irises of the eye, and then the god is alive in that temple. That's the last step. So the eyes are the sight of true life. Now, non-temple images, so I'm talking about in a temple, you put an official image in, then you paint the eyes and it comes alive. But if you just have an image in your home, it is also considered alive, but not in the same degree as in a temple. The temple image is always kind of better, grander, mostly because it's the focus of so many people's worship than the image in the home. So what does it mean that Darshan is about seeing? Well, this is kind of a key idea. So when you go to a temple, your main goal is to see God. Often when I'm in India, people will say to me in English, let's go see God. And that just means go to the temple. You don't think twice about it. You're going to go see God. So upon entry, if there are other people, you wait in line. And when you reach the front, it's just you and God. And for a split second, you and God are together. You share a moment. If it's busy, this is only going to be a quick second, and then somebody's going to shove you out of the way so they can have the experience of someone will shove them out of the way. If it's an empty temple, you can stand for quite a while there in front of God, and it's quite pleasant. In some temples, the whole building will be really dark, and there'll just be a flash of light, so you only see God for a split second, which is really striking. So in this moment, the worshiper stares at God, but God stares back at the worshiper. You share a moment. When you go for darshan or just to a temple, you are there to see God, but you're also there to share that moment with God. In fact, the word bhakti, which I've translated as devotion over and over again, is a main ideal in Hinduism, but it doesn't really mean, it means, bhakti means to share in something, to share in the enjoyment of something, in fact. So the worshiper and God enjoy one another. Now, you can pray when you're in front of God, or you can just dwell in happiness at being there with God. And if you go to temples often, you just start to feel a connection and an intimacy with the images, and you do sometimes feel like they're quite living. It's hard to explain if you're a Protestant Christian or a Catholic. Well, Catholic's a little easier, but it really can be a powerful experience. So after the worshiper has their experience, their moment with God, they've taken darshan, they will be handed by the temple priest prasad. What is prasad? Prasad means something like edible grace. These are the leftovers from worship. Like you've gone, you brought, some sweets and some bananas and whatnot, and then the priest will hand you back some special sweet that the idea is God has consumed your offerings and is giving you back something. You can eat that right away as some sort of sweet treat that is God's edible grace and blessings, or you can take it with you and give it to like your family member or someone that wasn't able to go that day. Just you give it to someone so that they too can share in the grace of God. And it's often said that these have a bit of power, that they can ward off bad luck, that they can cure illness. I would regularly, with one Hindu family I would spend a lot of time with, if someone would be sick, I would go to the temple, and then I would come back and I would always bring them prasad from the temple. And anybody who got it when they were sick, like, this will heal me. It's just one of those fun things about religion. So in Hinduism, we need to understand that sight is also touch. I know that sounds really strange. So what happens in the understanding of vision and Hinduism is that the power of your vision, or the power of your eyes, moves forward out from your eye on a sort of ray of light. And then it touches the thing it means to see, and it's transformed and altered and sort of picks up a piece of that thing it touched, and then it brings it back to the seer. So in darshan, you're looking out at Ganesh, and you're touching him, and you're bringing him back into you. But also, he's touching you through his ray of vision and bringing that back to you. So in darshan, you are touching God, and God is touching you. Now, let me warn you something. If you're in a Hindu temple, never physically touch that Hindu image, for you'd defile it, because you are not pure like it is. However, some would argue that the deity is so powerful and pure that even touching it would cause the toucher to be damaged, to be ill, or even to die. So the only people that touch the Hindu gods' images are the temple priests. And the reason they can do that is not because they're knowledgeable, but because they've maintained a very special type of purity rules so that they can touch the body of God. In Nepal, that kind of goes out the window, which is kind of wild. I don't have time to get into it. So when I say that we're looking at the anthropology of wonder, I'm giving you the context of this study. The book that we're looking at in question is called The Cow in the Elevator. Now, what is the meaning of the title? So in fact, Srinivas was, she was doing research, of course, and she attended a Vastu Shastra ritual. Vastu Shastra is lore about buildings. So religious lore about buildings. So a Vastu Shastra ritual here is a blessing of a new building. In fact, she goes to a contemporary, high-tech, luxury apartment building. Now, part of a traditional house blending is having a cow, which is sacred in Hinduism, walk through the building. And all of its actions that it does blesses the home. Even if it poops on the floor, that's great. That's a good thing. That's a good cow thing. Whatever it licks, it's blessed. Whatever it sniffs, it's blessed. The cow brings blessings. So she describes this comical experience where these folks want to do this ritual, but they need to get a cow to the apartment. And they got to get the cow onto the elevator. So they spend all this time getting this poor cow into this elevator in a high-rise apartment so it can wander around an apartment to do a blessing. And she thought, that's what I'll name my book, The Cow in the Elevator, which is a good one. It really shows old and new India together. And that's really what I want to get to, is the old and the new are found together. Old traditions are not cast off here. They're not updated, but they're grafted into a new environment. The old ways are done in a way, if they are done in a new context, they're not abandoned, such as a cow walking through your house to bless it. There's a way that you can do that in this modern contemporary world. But what do I mean by the wonderful? Well, from the Oxford English Dictionary, we read that wonder is the emotion excited by the perception of something novel and unexpected or inexplicable. It's surprise. But wonder is also, it's a very pleasant surprise. It's a hint of ecstatic, even though it doesn't take you out of your body. Astonishment mingled with perplexity or bewildering curiosity, which is how I feel often when I'm in India, is I have a bewildered curiosity. Also, the state of mind in which this emotion exists. An instant of this, a fit of wonderment. So in this, I have a picture of the Ganesh immersions that happen every year, where they build these huge images of Ganesh, and then on a very special day, everyone goes out and they dunk them in the river. And in this point, everyone expresses this sort of wondrous glory at the beautiful images, at the fact that the images will be dissolved in the river over time, that they have these beautiful visions of Ganesh that are just temporary. You know, I've never been to the Ganesh immersion rituals in the area of India where they're done, but when they happen, they're televised all over India. It was actually one of the first things I saw on television the first time I went to India. So Srinivas focuses on those experiences she observes and sometimes feels herself. She talks on many occasions about wiping tears from her eyes when she sees an incredibly powerful or beautiful thing happening in a temple. So she observes when priests and devotees and even herself experience this excitement. They spontaneously laugh, cry, or stand gape-mouthed and wide-eyed. This is catharsis. I don't know if you've heard this term catharsis before. Catharsis is when your body reacts to something you see, such as when you see great art and you find yourself having goosebumps. Me, I don't like to watch Marvel superhero movies because I grew up reading Marvel comic books and I get really emotional when I watch them. I'll find my eyes tearing up when I see the heroes of the comic books on the TV screen, and I experience a sense of wonder. I find that unpleasant though, but that's me. I'm weird. So catharsis, when your body reacts to a sensory experience. So she's looking for this eruption of wonder that she sees in rituals. Now, wonder is not unique to Hinduism or even to religion. It happens to us anytime we are shocked in a pleasant way. Like, look at this glorious Ganesh that's actually being put out by Royal Stag, that's a whiskey company. And look at him. There's a certain wonder to it. Look at him. Look at his wide eyes as he's got his cell phone. He's playing on his desktop computer. The old is new. Ganesh is often seen as being very playful. Why wouldn't he be playful? Is he less divine because he has sunglasses and popcorn instead of ladus and an axe or a noose? So technology is sort of, well, no, let me say this another way. For me, I experience senses of wonder, especially in India and with Hinduism, if I travel to a hard-to-get-to temple, or I go to a temple that I wanted to go to for a long time, or I see a god that I've never seen before that I've always wanted to. I mean, also, we see gods on the move when they're put on parade. When we see these gods outside of the temple, it makes they're out of context, and being out of context makes it somehow magical and wonderful. Many Hindus will express wonder when they see how beautiful a deity appears, or how glorious are the ornaments and outfits and adornments. This is what these priests keep calling the alankara, the ornament or ornamentation. So often you'll hear people say as you leave the temple, oh, the goddess Radha looked so beautiful today. Oh, did you see how they dressed Venkateshwara? So they'll talk about how the way that the priest dressed the deities, and if it's particularly wonderful, they'll describe that with a sense of wonder. So what about wonder and technology? I jumped down below on this slide. So Srinivasan is informed by interviews with her priests and her devotees, and she shows how technology inspires wonder, and she shows that that inspired wonder translates into greater devotion, a renewed sense of the sacred, revealing the complexity of the divine. So while everything just seems normal in the temple, when something wild happens, when suddenly there are new lights that show up, when there's a different type of music than you've ever heard before. If the deities start to move, there's that sense of, oh my goodness, what was once old and still is now fresh and alive, and I'm inspired to return to the sacred and see new complexity. It brings things to life. It brings us to the moment in a way that is not usually there. Now, anytime we pick up a new technology in a non-religious way, we're always surprised, but that surprise turns into routine. I mean, I just got a smartphone relatively recently. I was on a flip phone for years, and I liked it. But there is a certain wonder to the ability of the stuff I can do with my smartphone. But in time, it just becomes another thing you use. Think about when you get your updated phone that you've been looking forward to for a year. You're sort of amazed. Now, in a religious context, when technological innovations are added to ritual and religion, the sacred itself, that sacred thing, what is the sacred but the thing that's old? It becomes newfangled and exciting. Now, traditional people may see religious innovations in this way as being mere spectacle, but priests and devotees see inspired wonder that enhances the experience and immediacy of the divine. I've not read any other book like Tulasi Srinivas's, and I'd like to see a lot more books like this about wonder, about joy, about pleasure, about excitement, about new encounters of the sacred in temple life and in religious life. Few folks actually really talk to priests. It's surprising how much we have, interviews with people who are devoted to gods, but priests are very rarely interacted with. Anthropologists never talk to them. Srinivasan, being from the area and speaking multiple languages, and having these connections to these priests, she has this wonderful rapport as they explain everything about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and why they're doing it. And it's a voice we don't often hear in Hinduism. And it makes you wonder, maybe we should let the priests talk a little bit more. We should find a way to listen to them more. Now, traditionalist insiders and scholars would argue that technological innovation of deities and imagery is a degeneration of religion. But this study shows otherwise, that newfangled types of religions actually create more devotion and more religious intensity. In India, I want you to remember that worship and prayer are not disconnected. Like we think of as Protestants or as Catholics, we think of worshiping something and praying to something as different acts. For Hindus, engaging in darshan, witnessing a religious procession, a parade, singing a holy song, or praying in your home are all acts of worship, devotion, and prayer, all at the same time. They're not separated out. So why is technology such a big deal in Srinivas's book? Well, Srinivas's fieldwork is in Bangalore. Now, where's Bangalore? Well, it's sort of in the south center of India, down in the point in South India. It's where her family lives and where her father currently resides. Her father, in fact, is a legendary sociologist of Hinduism who put forth a bunch of theoretical ideas that I myself use in some of my writing. But Bangalore is sort of unique in contemporary India. It is the new high-tech India, the Silicon Valley of India. I have a friend who's doing research there on engineers who are Hindus, and he talks about contemporary buildings where technology is done, and the shrines that are put in there by Hindus as sort of cathedrals of technology, cathedrals of the sacred. So Bangalore, which now goes by the term Bangalore to be closer to the local languages, is a site of tremendous education, engineering firms, software companies, and high-tech services. This is the Indian Silicon Valley. Now, when I first went there in 1999, it was still called the Garden City. And I don't recognize it when I go there now. It is a big, modern, kind of crazy, and unfortunately polluted city. But it's very well put together. It's very modern. It is incredibly wealthy. It was once a city of gardens, and now it's a city of high-rises and luxury apartments. Locals in Bangalore are predictably tech-savvy and always have the newest, up-to-date gadgetry, whether it's hardware or software, much of which was designed right in the area. So much of what we have in our modern technology comes out of Bangalore. There are multiple languages that Srinivas engages in. She engages in Kannada, which is the language of this very area. And then she also speaks in Tamil with a lot of the priests, so that's from Tamil Nadu to the east of there. Then Sanskrit, of course, and English. All of these languages bounce around in this very sophisticated city, which is common in big South Indian cities, but especially here. Now, her fieldwork actually connects experiences gathered over 20 years of research, and India changed quite a bit in the 20 years of her doing her research. It also sort of dovetails to when I first went to India as a much younger man. So let me tell you a little bit about how India has changed in this sense. So technology expanded incredibly from, say, 1999 when I first went to my more recent trips there. Indians have been fast to pick up phones and smartphones. They entered the mass media age and the digital age faster than they could even develop infrastructure. There was mass use of cell phones in almost every home across India when many of these homes still didn't have running water. There are arguments that there was a point where you had, 60% of Indian homes had cell phones when only 30% of them had toilets. That shows you just how fast Indians in India took to technology, and mass media technology in particular. When I first went to India, very few people had phones in their homes. If you're going to use the phone, you'd go out into the street into specific pay stalls, and you'd pay for a certain amount of money using their phone there. By the time I went in 10 years later, so that was 99 when I first went. When I next went in like 2008, 2009, that was the point where the cell phones had started, and almost everybody had flip phones. And the only time people were using these large phones, they called STD phones, and these phone booths and phone stalls were if they were making international calls. And to this point now, people have cell phones that can all make international callings that they can charge up and spend 1 rupee at a time. And one of the other cool things that was happening when I went in 2009 that I couldn't imagine has now taken off even further is people use their phones like banks. So you can take rupees from your phone that you charge up from the phone company or purchase from the phone company, and then you can transfer them phone to phone to someone else. This was so novel at the time. I'd love to see what's going on now. It's been a couple of years since I've been in India. Okay, so Bangalore, high-tech city. So we're going to talk about a helicopter and Garuda. So Garuda is the mount of Vishnu. He is a ferocious and terrifying bird, and he kills snakes. He beats up enemies. He's tough as heck. You can see him here on the left in a particularly ferocious form. He's like a bird and a dragon together. Remember that he is the friend, the assistant, and the ride of Vishnu. But before we do that, we need to talk about a goddess. So we're going to talk about a few instances of wonder and technological innovation in the Ganesh temple in Malleshwaram, where Srinivas is located in Bangalore. So in 1999, it was a good year. I was there in India. One of the temple priests that she has a long relationship with becomes really enamored with the mechanical processes. He gets this idea that he wants to build an animatronic goddess that can move around. In particular, he wants to make an animated or a movable version of the goddess Mahishasura Mardini. That's a big name. It means she who crushes the demon who is a buffalo. Buffalo demon crusher. She's one of my favorite versions of the different goddesses in India. So during the festival of the 9 nights, which is a big festival in India called Navaratri, the goddess Durga, or Mahishasura Mardini, you can just stick with both those names, she is the embodiment of all of the powers of all the gods around, all of the Shaktis. She slays the buffalo demon by name of Mahishasura, who tries to capture her consciousness. When he tries to capture her consciousness, she roars forward and cuts off the head of the buffalo, and you see the spirit of the demon coming out of the buffalo, and she's going to kill the spirit as well. See this kind of great image here. So what happens is this temple priest is able to eventually succeed and build a mechanical goddess who is adorned with flashing lights, and her arm can go up and down, stabbing into the buffalo demon with every time they move. People go nuts when they see it. They are so excited. But you got to think about it. What would it be like when you're used to, if you're seeing a picture of Mahishasura Mardini, you're seeing her in a painting, or you're seeing her in a sculpture. There's a lot of sculptures of her in stone. To see her actually moving would be really exciting, especially considering, you know, she's probably lit up and had all sorts of great stuff happen. I don't have any pictures of this. Anyway, so the tech might have been pretty simple, but it was quite effective. Suddenly, the old goddess is made alive. She is refreshed. And she also, by being alive and moving, pulls in new and young worshipers who are attracted to this novel version of her. As Srinivas says, the technological advance pulls us toward our dreams. Technology can make our dreams come to life. So to go further and get to this Ganesh and his helicopter, the main priest for the Ganesh temple gets this idea that he wants to install this regional goddess by name of Banashankari. She's a goddess from Badami, but she's an important regional goddess for the area. So her name means something like forest goddess. So his idea is he wants to put this goddess in the Ganesh temple in order to draw more female devotees, because there's a shrine to this goddess elsewhere, not so far nearby, to the south, and it always has tons and tons of women coming. So it's like, yeah, let's put on this guy. Let's get more people coming to the temple, more ladies coming to the temple. That's a good thing. Also, why would this be important? If you go and spend a lot of time in India, or even if you just go to a Hindu temple in the United States, you'll see the vast majority of people that come and make offerings and are really devoted to the gods are women. So more women means more active devotees. The religious work in a temple is predominantly done by women who are lay folks. The priests do a fair amount of work because they can touch the gods, they can do the rituals and whatnot. But when it comes to lay folks who are not priests, the majority of folk interacting there are going to be women. Also, having multiple deities and multiple images of deities is quite common throughout Hindu temples. You'll have one main god, and then you'll have other gods around and goddesses around, just because it's good to have a crowd. I mean, the funny thing about India, when you go, and in Hinduism, is it's always a party. You go into the Hindu temple, and there's a lot of gods there. There's one main god, but then there's a party going on. Everybody else is in the pool. It's great. So they get this idea. The temple priest wants to set up the goddess, so he gets an image of her, and the minute that they paint the eyes onto the goddess and she comes to life, he wants to rent a helicopter and have a young priest shower down upon the temple space where the goddess is coming to life flower petals and offerings and garlands. So it's as if it's raining blessings from the sky, which is in fact what happens in a lot of Hindu epics. When something colossal or amazing happens, flowers will fall from the sky. So they send this temple priest up by name of Bhairavan, and he wears like a flight helmet, and they make a lot of jokes about him being Top Gun, which I found really amusing. Anyway, so at the point they pull on, they paint the eyes on the goddess. The priest in the helicopter drops the offerings. But as the helicopter is circling the temple, they see a large bird, a Brahmani kite, which means they are these giant birds that you see throughout South India, and they have really long wingspans, and they sort of glide along on the air currents. So this large bird is out in front of the helicopter that is carrying the priest. Not unlike, we see Vishnu over here riding atop Garuda, who's ready to beat up some snake or kill some demon. Look at the bird on the right. That's one of these kites. They're pretty cool birds, actually. So as people are looking up, they're seeing this huge bird in front of the helicopter, and everyone really just says straight off the bat, this is Garuda. This is the mythical vehicle and powerful ally of the god Vishnu. And everybody who sees the bird in front of the helicopter connects the god and the helicopter via the bird. So the head priest says that all of this is the will of Ganesh. What has happened is, by this bird being there, you have the symbolism of Garuda, the flying chariot of Vishnu, the priest from the sky. Everything comes together, and people go crazy. They're just amazed at this experience. So in this, old stories and symbols are made new by reading them onto this technological novelty. The world is sort of mixed up, as one of the priests says. I'm not going to go into that. There's a complicated thing I could go into that's pretty good, but I'm not going to. The main priest actually interprets all of this by quoting the Chandogya Upanishad, a very old scripture in Hinduism. And it says that new things are the avatars or the incarnations of old things. One priest does worry that now everybody's going to want a helicopter for consecrating images. And that is a danger. When you have novelty like this, it can become expected. It can become quotidian. Now, there's another story in here that's quite intriguing. And this is a drumming machine, not a mechanical machine that uses the drums, not quite like the one that we saw in the picture in the book. All right, so temples traditionally hire musicians to perform in festivals and religious processions, but they also hire these musicians to come and do the morning rituals in which they wake up the god, the evening worshiping of the god called arati, and the rituals to put the god to sleep. You see, the gods in the temples live through the same daily cycles as human beings. Now, at a certain point, a conflict brewed between the head priest, and he fired the hereditary musicians, saying they didn't do a good job and they were often late, even though Srinivas notes they did a fine job and they were always there on time, unless they were called at a random time, and then they got there as quick as they could. And also remember, these musicians have a hereditary position. Their family has always done this. So the priest, after firing these traditional musicians, contacts a local engineer who makes him a drum machine. So this machine would play 2 additional drums in 6 different patterns. Clearly this drum can't do that, but it's something to behold. One second. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Woo. I got it. All right. So traditional music is always, okay, so think of it this way. If I hire a musician to come and play specific types of music for me every day, it's going to be different because it's a live performance. Traditional music is always different every time it's performed. It is nuanced by the musicians. This drum machine is going to remove any nuance, and in fact just makes a dreadful racket. Traditional musicians say that looking at these mechanical performances or looking at any pre-recorded type of music, it has no rasa, no flavor, no feeling, no emotion, no nuance. It becomes literally mechanical. So they start using this drum machine, and the old folks thinks it's just a racket and it's horrible. And Srinivas thinks, okay, they'll get rid of this and go back to the traditional musicians. It's way better. But young folk were really intrigued. This is Bangalore. So Bangalore kids like anything new. Old folks often say that the youth and their demand for new technology is a sign of moral degeneration. Maybe it's something more, though. Eventually, the Bangalore kids argue that the loud racket of the drums is really good, in fact. It's good because you don't try to listen to the music and actively pay attention or see how they're playing it different from before, pay attention to what the musicians are doing. You just hear this loud banging racket, and then you drown out the world and only focus on God. So they have their own interpretation here, in which the drumming and that loud din of sound, that technological innovation that most folks who are traditionalists would say, that's horrible, let's get rid of it, and they find a new interpretation of it. They say it's like a white noise that drowns out the world. If you go to this same area now, these mechanical machines are everywhere in all the temples. I don't know what's happened to these traditional musicians. Probably they're all out of work, and that's a sad tale. Furthermore, when you go to temples these days, you hear quite a lot of pre-recorded professional worship music that's played through loudspeakers. When I first went to India, this is unheard of. But nowadays, you'll have pre-recorded music that will be played during worship. All right, so we're back to images. And Srinivas shows the change in the understanding of not only images, but in the way we take pictures and distribute pictures in the world and in Hinduism. So traditionally, you would have a camera. Now, when I first went to India, nobody would pull out a temple to take a picture of a god. Like me, I get a sneaky and I have my little film camera, and I could maybe get a picture every now and then, thinking I could use this picture at some point when teaching or for paper I want to write. And I was always like, hey, I'm doing this for education. They'd be like, hey, don't take pictures. And I always wondered about why. Priests would actually argue, and Srinivas reproduces this argument. She says that the priest would say that when you take a picture of a god on film, you're pulling its energy away, pulling the energy away from the god and taking it elsewhere. Now, they have some sophisticated arguments for this, but you got to remember, photography is only like 100 or 150 years old. Especially convenient photography is probably really only about 80 years old. So these can't be terribly old arguments. So could they change? Hard to say. Also, when you go to a temple and you would think, boy, I wish I had a picture of this, you could often go to the outside of the temple and you could buy pictures taken by professional photographers and sold by the temples. Now, younger folks would see these images as intellectual property that the temple should own. So don't take pictures of it. You should buy it from the temple. Older folks would say you shouldn't take the picture because it's metaphysical. You shouldn't try to steal the God's father. But then again, somebody took a picture of that photograph that they're selling outside the temple. And by purchasing that picture, aren't you also stealing the power of the God? If the picture's stolen, it gets all confusing. I've gone round and round with this idea. So Srinivas, when she first starts doing her research, is admonished. She's told to never take a picture of the deity. However, when she returned in the 2000s, and she thought maybe it had to do with she just had a crappy old camera, she brings a really nice camera. And still they're like, nope, you can't take pictures of the gods. No way. They would let her take pictures, but only of the temple and of the temple worshipers. And she was scolded anytime she would take a picture that even could possibly have the deity within it. Things changed. And I remember when I hit the scene in 2008, I was just amazed by how much they changed. So Srinivas shows up with a digital camera, and she talks about doing this in like 2000, I think she's talking about like 2009, but I saw it before then. So she shows up with a digital camera, and then she notes that everybody has cell phones with cameras on them. And in fact, she shows up with her digital camera, and the main priest, who always said, don't take a picture of the god, sits her right in front of the god in a way that wherever she's going to take a picture, the god's going to be in it. And if she takes a picture with the god, and he says, oh, let me see. And he looks at it and says, aha, it's so clear, it's so beautiful. So he sort of loves these pictures. And then folks are constantly taking pictures and sharing them with friends. Anytime I go to like big important temples, I'm usually surrounded by people with, not with cameras, but with smartphones that they're taking pictures of and sharing them with their friends. So these days, where did that thought of removing the energy of the god go? Is it because you pulled the energy out of the god and put it in a physical picture? How is, when I look at a digital picture, it's not as real as a film picture. But the priests say now it's really real because we can save it forever and we can share it and everyone can see God and it looks so real. So my intuition, and Srinivas kind of agrees with me, it's the exact opposite. So yeah, so people would use digital cameras, but mostly phones, and there's no regulation against taking pictures anymore. Look here, and I have Ganesha selfies. So you have this woman taking a picture of herself with a Ganesha image, a guy doing the same. And then if you look at this image over here, you have baby Ganesh with his dad Shiva and his mom Parvati and his brother Skanda and the holy cow Nandi, and he's holding a selfie stick so the family can take a selfie together. Ganesha takes selfies with the other gods. I mean, talk about fantastic. That is a huge change in how one interacts with technology and how folks interact even with deities. I mean, the idea of me pulling out a camera in front of a god, like a film camera in 1999, and taking a picture like this, I mean, I think I would have been murdered. And rightly so. Times change. Religions change. Technologies change. Maybe wonder is the same. Because these are more than just smiles of joy. You're getting a picture of you with God. And that's kind of a big deal. So anyway, so there's this story I want to tell you really quick. One friend of mine recently, when we went on this really kind of cool pilgrimage out to the hinterlands in Maharashtra, I was taking all these pictures because I wanted to teach a lesson on it. And he looks at me and he says, why are you taking all these pictures? They're all online. You just get them all offline. You don't even need to take the pictures anymore. So that shows you the way that pictures of deities have proliferated and the way people think about them has really changed. Folks have begun to collect digital images, storing an incredible amount of these images on their phones and computers. In fact, we read about our priests wanting to see old photos that were not supposed to be taken but were digitized to look at the different ways the deities were decorated over the years. In my experience, folks show these pictures and even selfies to show that, hey, I was there with the gods. Also, they treat the images a little bit like they are gods. So I have a friend who just sent me a whole bunch of pictures of a ritual that she sponsored, and she showed me pictures of the gods, and I both, she was sharing them with me on a Zoom call, and we were both just open mouthed with glory and so thrilled at how beautiful the gods were. But look how we shared that together and shared that experience. I mean, I even displayed an image of my favorite god on my laptop screen when I took my PhD exams because I wanted that god looking at me. Now, here's the funny thing. That god I can't see in India because Westerners aren't allowed in that temple. But I can have a picture, and I can look at the picture, and I can have a relationship with that picture. Now, this also gets complicated by social media. Temples now have social media pages in which folks spread and disseminate a huge number of images, and they interact with those images, sometimes with great devotion. They tell stories on social media about miracles and vows and prayers answered. Temples will have their own sites. Images abound on social media and YouTube. You can see that there are slideshows and videos of temple worship all over YouTube that add modern devotional songs and are quite lovely. In this way, the temple is still, most importantly, a physical place in India, but it can be experienced when you're away from the temple. Sometimes I'll actually just watch YouTube videos of temple worships and just be like, oh man, that's great. Wish I was there. And it's more than just a wish I was there. So you feel like you are there. You feel in a sense like you can transact with the gods, and it's mediated through YouTube. Oh, that sounds weird, mediating the gods via YouTube. I mean, also you have digital religion and digital ritual. So Srinivas tells a story in which her mother, who was in Boston at the time, needed some minor surgery, but they wanted to have a ritual done in advance for good luck and to ward off bad luck, to ward off danger, to worship God in advance of trouble. Just the sort of things. These are what are called apotropaic rites, or rites that ward off what is bad. Hindus do these all the time. Apotropaic rites are kind of great because it provides a structure when you're facing changes. It gives you support in a time of uncertainty. So Srinivas calls up the temple in India by phone, and the priest directors sponsor a set of specific worship rituals. The priest quickly consulted astrologers and ritual specialists and found out that the auspicious day to do it was the next day. So they just did it the next day. They were able to get everything together while they were in Boston, and the priest got everything arranged, and they sent them the funds, as you can do pretty easily now. And what you see is that they were like, well, how can we get a family member or someone nearby to stand in as the sponsor position to the ritual? And the priest said, yeah, you don't need to send anybody. Just FaceTime us and you can do the ritual over the phone, a continent away. So they end up engaging in the ritual while the priests are doing all these rituals and making offerings to Ganesh, and they're able to watch, observe, and the priests even interact with them over the phone and over their computers. Now, she tells a delightful story about how the network would drop out and catch up again, and the priests would communicate them all the while, on the phone or on different digital platforms, telling them how it's going, waiting for the cameras to come back up. And during one of the long dropped calls, she puts her phone in front of an image she has of Ganesha in her house. And upon the priest signing back on, she hears him say, my boss is on the line. That's like my favorite part of this. So in this way, technology allows people to be united, though far away. It facilitates rituals, and it allows a sense of wonder at the novelty of all of this. So will this novelty of being able to do a ritual from long ways away ever wear off? I don't think so. I think this will persist. So in the takeaway, what's the point here? So much of religion and religious studies and the history of religion is about painful conflicts, dissatisfaction, and violence. But here we have a study of religion that is about people coming together, having pleasant and not very extreme experiences. The experience of wonder at seeing a beautiful God is not like being abducted by aliens. It's not an extreme experience. It's not the explosive sacred. People experience the sacred and the divine in their everyday life, and it's pleasant. Seeing God is a powerful experience. Just seeing God for the Hindu creates an everyday sense of wonder. But using technology, they're able to see God more often and in new ways. More God is good. Focusing on wonder places the focus on pleasure. Religion is fun. This is one of the things I noticed that's so different from my upbringing. Going to church is not fun. Going to a Hindu temple is a hoot. I have a buddy, a Tamil guy I knew in college, who I knew him before I really got to understand Hinduism. He used to say, Hindu temples are nuts. People are throwing milk all over the place and powders, and people are breaking coconuts. It's crazy. I have no idea what's going on. He's a very westernized gentleman. But religion is fun. Temple time is fun. Temple time is a glorious time to connect with God, who's like the coolest thing in the world. And, you know, for me, sometimes when I go to the temple, I'll take my darshan, and then I just sit in the corner, just enjoying, just being with God. I had a friend who, after we would go to rituals, would always say, let's just sit. Let's just be with God for a while. And we'd just sit. We wouldn't really meditate. We'd just sit and enjoy being there, being with God. It's kind of great. Now, these technological innovations make the old fresh. They pull people in a new way. It invigorates people. One of my first Hinduism teachers would always say, I don't really care. I'll tell you what I mean by that. He would say, if whatever they're doing creates devotion, then it's good, no matter what. If whatever is being done makes people love God more, then it's good. To this, I want to add kind of an important point, at least for me, and that's the re-enchantment of the world. Now, at the beginning of the modern era, Max Weber, the famous sociologist, said that the world was disenchanted in the modern world. Religion was only about beliefs now. There were no miracles. There was no magic. There were no transactions with God. As modern folks, we need to focus just on the world as it is. I say hogwash. No. Let's re-enchant the world. Let's have spirits exist and interact with them. Let's have profound paranormal things happen. Because why not? And if there is God or there are invisible beings that you can transact with, and I'm really lukewarm on whether that's true or not, well, I want to experience that. How can I experience the presence of gods and of magic and of the sacred more? And if technology is a way to do that, more power to it. All around me, I meet people who are turning to alternate religions, or they're turning to the esoteric and the occult, seeking mystical experiences. And these can be facilitated if you seek them out. The world is less cut from spirit than one would think, even though when we think of only our reason and only our limited identity as being what we are, we feel cut off, we feel disconnected. But maybe that doesn't have to be the case. Technology. And I want to mention that I often describe sort of my practice with the tarot cards, which is something I find really useful, to be an occult technology, occult meaning hidden. So the esoteric or the secret lore or these occult techniques or hidden technologies, these can allow for new experiences of the divine. And like the Chandogya Upanishad said, the new is an avatar of the old. But it's not that the new and the novel replaces the old. The old doesn't go away. The old lives fresh in the new, not even in a new way. It's old and new come together. When you have digital Hinduism in which the temple rituals can be done over the internet in a virtual way, the temple rituals are still there just as they are. They just have this new medium. The old doesn't disappear. And when technology exists, it just facilitates the old in a new way. The old is reincarnated into the new. We don't have to let go of anything. So I want to ask you, how do you think technology can create wonder or facilitate religious experience in your life? And what needs to facilitate wonder? Where do you find wonder? I wonder.